Good morning and welcome to our webinar on how to manage emotional and or stress eating featuring Dr. Ramchandani. I'm just going to open up with a couple of announcements. This webinar will be about 60 minutes. We'll have a presentation portion first, and then we will have time for Q&A towards the end. This webinar will be recorded and we will be posting this on our Healthy Lifestyle channel, YouTube, shortly following the webinar. Your video and audio are off and cannot be connected. And then lastly, we encourage you to ask questions through the Q&A feature or by sending a chat to host and panelists. You can send questions throughout the talk and we will answer them as many as we can towards the end of the webinar. Thank you for that, and I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Ramchandani.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that intro. And thank you for inviting me today to talk about one of my favorite topics. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So like Katie said, my name is Shalu Ramchandani. I have a weight management practice in Boston, and I also am on faculty at the Benson Henry Institute at MGH. And I'm here today to talk to you about emotional eating. So I understand this was a popular subject that had come up for a lot of people. And I have to say that even with my patient practice, it's probably a topic that comes up every other visit, as you can imagine. And I'm sure that all of us have experienced having a day when we are coming home from work, completely exhausted, and maybe even just sitting in front of our favorite sitcom to get some laughs in. And then an hour later, you feel happier, but then you look down and you see like your bag of M&Ms is gone. So we all have been there, right? We recognize that proper nutrition is an important pillar of our well-being. So what is this about stressful days or even upset days that can sometimes help or actually make us lose sight of our wanting to be healthy and eating healthy, and our best of intentions crumble? So emotional eating is a real entity. It is referred to as the act of eating that occurs in response to either stress or negative emotions, rather than eating because we're hungry. So these are going to be my objectives. We're going to talk a little bit about emotional eating, the role of stress, and then appreciating our hunger and fullness, our internal cues when we are eating, and then learning how to develop a healthy relationship with food. And then we're going to talk about mindful eating, and then lastly about self-compassion. So this is giving away my age. I grew up watching the Golden Girls, and I remember every episode of the Golden Girls was something to do with cheesecake by the end of the episode. So I thought this was a nice one to play.
Four women friends. They laugh, they cry, they eat. They love, they hate, they eat. Dream, they hope, they eat. Every time you turn around, they eat. Sophia, are those four women us? Look in the mirror, blah, blah, blah.
Isn't that so true? In our culture, we all use food as reward. And we use food for so many other reasons. So all the reasons that we eat, first of all, the availability, right? It's 24/7 available. It's a matter of walking down to your refrigerator, and now even on your phone, a lot of apps that are easily available that we can just order our favorite food and have that delivered. But the reasons that we all eat is obviously hunger, boredom. We all recognized during COVID, there was a lot of walking over to the kitchen and just randomly looking through the pantry and grabbing something. And time of the day, what I find sometimes people say is that I wasn't really hungry all day, but it was dinner time, so I decided to eat. And again, this is something that we do because culturally that's just been sort of embedded in us, that we eat breakfast at this time, we eat lunch at this time, and then dinner at this time. And regardless of whether we're hungry or not, we think that this is what we have to do. And then socially, of course, we use food as a way to celebrate, right? So parties, birthdays, that is what we always think about is the food. What are we going to serve? And then sleep deprivation. It's amazing to me when I get a history from people of how much sleep they're getting and how little people sleep. Sleep is probably the most important pillar of our well-being. And people often get really surprised when I tell them how their years of sleep deprivation has activated their stress physiology, but more so that when they're having less sleep at night, their hunger hormones are elevated during the day. So the ghrelin hormone, that's the hormone that growls, right? So it makes you hungry. And also your leptin, which is the hormone that makes you feel satiated, that is less. So people, when they're feeling sleepy or tired because they haven't had a good night's rest, tend to eat more calories, but also tend to go more for the comforting foods as well. Restrictive diet. So when people are restricting, as you can imagine, that is going to also cause episodes of where they actually will go the opposite way, and then they start to binge because now they are ravenous. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. Inadequate hydration. It's amazing to me, again, how we don't drink enough. There's a lot of people who go about their day and maybe only have 1 or 2 glasses of water a day. And then again, sometimes going into the kitchen, we find ourselves kind of not knowing why we're there. Really, it's maybe you're thirsty, right? But instead, we feel that maybe it's hunger, and that's going to help take away whatever it is that they're experiencing at that time. And then lastly, medications. There are a lot of medications that can actually increase your hunger. And some of the other reasons, of course, environmental triggers. So walking past a bakery. So again, you may not be hungry, but now you walk past this bakery and you see these amazing pastries sitting in the window. And of course, what happens? Immediately you start salivating, and that's what you want. What I hear the most reason why people are eating, quote, emotionally, is because they want their me time. I hear this a lot from moms, especially, and it's the essence of doing things all day long for everybody else, right? We're working, we're taking care of the household, and at the end of the day, they are just spent. And that's when that's their me time. So even that means compromising their sleep. They really want to make sure that they have that me time. And oftentimes, when they are under this activated stress physiology, that me time ends up becoming around eating. And I'm not saying that only women will have this, also need their me time. But the bottom line is that for people who are doing more of just doing, like all day, we're just going without any downtime, without any pauses in our day, are often feeling at the end of the day that this is their me time and this is what they need to do. Emotional eating, quote, emotional eating, is anxiety. So anxiety when we use food to just calm us. Depression. So when sometimes people are eating really just for comfort. And then anger and frustration. So sometimes we eat as a release. And then, of course, just generally feeling stressed. So maybe you're not feeling any of those other emotions, but you've just had a really stressful day. And so why is it that people reach for comfort foods, right? We're not reaching for a plate of broccoli at that hour, right? And the reason is because comfort foods, as we call them, are typically rich in sugar, fat, right, and refined carbohydrates. And by eating them, we are releasing basically neurotransmitters. So like serotonin is a neurotransmitter that you can get an immediate effect of feeling relaxed from. And then they also trigger a neurotransmitter called dopamine. That's your happy hormone. So that neurotransmitter induces like a pleasurable effect. So it's So having that moment of eating that chocolate cupcake and then having that serotonin and the dopamine release, it now creates this sort of memory, this experience that, oh, when I felt awful, I went and I ate this and I felt really good. So now this memory is stored in your memory bank. And then we know exactly where we're going to find that the next time we're feeling that way, because we want to get that immediate release of not feeling good. So this is a very complicated looking slide, and I have no intention to confuse anyone, but it's really just to depict how complex it is for how our stress not only impacts our mood, but it also in fact impacts our lifestyle choices that we make and how it alters our physiology. So we know that there's a really complex relationship between our diet, our weight, as well as our behaviors, right? So stress acts through the brain to both affect our eating and our exercise behavior, right? We've all had those moments where we come home and we're super stressed, either we're feeling tired or even frustrated, but we're not really thinking at that moment that getting on an exercise bike is going to make me feel better. It's easier to get on the couch, right? So we know now with neurotransmitters like the serotonin, the dopamine, and neuropeptides that are located in both our brain as well as our gut, they will mediate all of the stress and the feeding behaviors that take place and can also contribute to many mental health disorders like anxiety or depression. We know that there is a binary relationship, so it can go back and forth between depression as well as unhealthy eating and weight gain. And we also are becoming increasingly aware now of the gut-brain axis. I'm sure that all of you have heard about the microbiome. We have billions of bacteria that live in our gut. And the microbiome, which is, as we call it, we always want to feed our gut bacteria in such a way that it's going to promote the healthy gut bacteria and basically downregulate and the unhealthy bacteria, as we say. And what we eat, we're going to see in the next slide, really does impact our mood as well. So if we're eating things that are either very sugary foods or fatty foods, that generally is going to promote the more unhealthy bacteria. So generally foods that are very refined and sugary or fried, they're not going to be very rich in fiber to begin with, right? So what's going to happen is that your unhealthy bacteria are the ones that tend to predominate, and they can result in other mental health issues like anxiety, depression. So what we feel impacts what we eat, right? Because emotionally, when we're feeling stress, is going to make us reach for these things that are what we call comfort foods. And then what we eat also impacts how we feel, just as I was describing in the previous slide. So what can we eat that's going to help to have the good bacteria from growing? I mean, it's going to aid rather. You want the good bacteria to grow and be predominantly, in the microbiome. So the things that are going to be helpful to have that good bacteria thrive is going to be foods that are very high in fiber. So your whole grains, right? Your beans. In fact, blueberries, berries in general, but I always tell my patients that just even like a handful of blueberries is kind of equivalent to having like 10 milligrams or whatever it is of Prozac, because it naturally will stimulate all of those happy hormones and elevate your mood. But other things like pears are very rich in fiber. And then, of course, aged fermented things like kefir, yogurt, kombucha, right? Very rich in probiotics. And also, of course, like sauerkraut, kimchi, And then other sort of naturally things that help us to feel more relaxed, things that have more tryptophan in them. So like turkey, after a Thanksgiving meal, we've all noticed how relaxed we're feeling, minus the wine. So turkey, but also chickpeas tend to be high in tryptophan. So generally avoiding things like a lot of artificial sweeteners like sodas, and avoiding things like alcohol and caffeine. And then, of course, a lot of fried foods, and then foods that are very rich in refined flour will be helpful to restore that microbiome. So this is just a better sort of depiction of this habit loop that we can sometimes get in. So oftentimes we have this stress, right? Trigger of our day. The boss yelled at me, something happened at work. You get home and you're upset. You reach for the comfort food, right? And immediately you're feeling good and you're feeling relaxed. And now temporarily you're feeling better. And then you can then go on to, again, reaching for more comfort food to continue to have that nice feeling. Or there's often, which we see very commonly with my patients that I talk to, is that guilt, right? The shame that why did I give in? And that was not the intention today. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see how all of that guilt, shame, and feeling just angry at yourself only increases now your stress response even further. So you get stuck in this habit loop, right? And then over time, when people are constantly in this habit loop, they stop feeling that they can differentiate even between their what we call the homeostatic hunger, so the actual hunger cues that people feel. Oftentimes, that feeling able to even tell what is actual hunger and what's what we call hedonic. So, what is the actual hunger? So, if you think about hunger, when you're thinking about how ravenous you feel some days, right? And that's because your energy is super, super low. Your mood can be irritable because you're hangry, right? You have trouble focusing. And of course, your stomach growling is a short indicator that you're hungry. So this is a hunger fullness scale. If anything I want you to take away from this talk, it will be to take a photograph of this slide and put that maybe on your refrigerator, just as a reminder. And, people often don't realize, where they are on the hunger scale. So I've had people tell me that when they're busy at work, they can go an entire day without eating. So then by the time they get home at the end of the day, now they are absolutely ravenous, right? And what happens when you're ravenous? You're eating everything in sight, right? And mindlessly. So when you're ravenous, that's number one on the scale, that you're painfully hungry. And then when you are about 3 to 4 on the scale, that's when you're just sort of starting to get hungry. That's usually when I tell people to honor that, right? Because now you're starting to get hungry. You don't want to get ravenous. So eat something. And if it's not your meal time, then have a healthy snack with you that you can you're ready to go. Like in your bag, you have a pack of, raw almonds, or you have an apple in your bag. And then when you're eating, when you get comfortably full, which, by the way, if we eat really fast, sometimes we're not getting that signal right away to tell us that we are actually full. So it is important to actually chew your food very slowly and eat mindfully, which we'll talk about as well. But by the time you're eating slowly, you're much more likely to get that satiety signal, right? So by the time you're at a 6 or a 7, that's when you're pretty comfortable. There's no need for any one of us to be eating until we're at a 9 or a 10, because we know how uncomfortable we feel when we're a 9 or 10, especially if we go lay down on the couch after that. And you know that people will have acid reflux and all of the other problems that come with it. And also on another note, when people are really restricting, they can go into this restrict binge cycle as well. That's another reason why not to get to one on that scale. And the other things that one can also do to promote that satiety on their plate is having a lot of fiber and protein, because we know that fiber and protein really help to promote satiety. So having a healthy relationship with food, I hear people saying all the time how I've been really bad this week, so I can't eat that donut, or that, I'm trying to be good today, so I'm not going to eat that donut. So by labeling food and labeling ourselves, we're already generating these emotions of having guilt and shame around our actions. And then our self-worth becomes dependent on being good. So if you have a donut, now all of a sudden you're feeling like you're bad, right? So you can see how that will activate your stress response, is that shame. And then the all or nothing, so that's sort of the black and white thinking, right? It's the perfectionist. So now I have had people say that I'm not going to eat those Ritz crackers, right? I already said I'm not going to do that. But I came home from work and I had one, and then I had a second one. And then I just said, you know what the hell? I've already been bad, so I may as well eat the entire sleeve. So that's that all or nothing. It's okay to just have that one or two. And then maybe you'll add some carrots, or some carrots with hummus, things again that will help with that satiety. And then eating in moderation and making it mindful. So when we restrict ourselves, again, when we are not allowing ourselves to eat something because we're labeling something as, quote, bad, sometimes we end up obsessing just about that thing, right? We are thinking about it constantly, like, oh, I really want that ice cream. I really want that ice cream. So they can go from that, like I said earlier, the restricting and then the binging cycle. So it's much more helpful to eat whatever it is that you want to eat, but in moderation and mindfully, which we're going to do in a minute. And then really just be compassionate to yourself, right? So if you want something, you can have it a little bit in moderation and enjoy it. So trust your body. Our body does a lot for us, and we don't even realize how much it does for us in a day, right? And we're breathing, we're moving. There's a lot that's built in our body. And we just have to get more in tune with these subtle cues. So give yourself the permission to eat when you are at a 3 or a 4, and allow yourself to feel the pleasure with the food without the guilt. But eating satisfying foods can cause physical as well as emotional sensations, and appreciate that. And then honor your hunger, right? By just eating enough and not overeating. So mindful eating, I actually grabbed a chocolate today, but I think I might have left it in the car. So it's okay. I am just going to walk you through this exercise. I'm sure many of you have already had, maybe even experienced this exercise. You can do this either with a Hershey's Kiss, or you can do it with maybe even a raisin. But the whole act of mindful eating is just enjoying, being present, and just allowing yourself to be, okay? So it could be, like I said, if you grab Hershey's chocolate, so instead of grabbing a bunch, we'll only grab one. And to eat mindfully, you're fully engaging in the senses that went into the preparation of that chocolate, but also the consumption now of what we're going to do with it. And this might entail something like holding this Hershey's chocolate between your finger and your thumb, and just appreciating it and just looking at it, and looking at the color, just noticing maybe even the texture in between your fingers or what it feels like. And then bringing it close to you so you're able to actually smell it. I don't know how many of you have ever taken the time to smell chocolate, but it does smell amazing. So now you can bring it closer and then just have it touch your lips. And then as you put it in your mouth, just notice how it feels as you take your first bite, and maybe you even hear what that bite sounds like. So now you're listening to that, but letting it sit on your tongue and letting it melt. And maybe you even close your eyes. So before you swallow, just noticing any sort of sensations. It could be that you're now really salivating and letting that melt and just noticing how that goes down. And just being mindful at this moment when you eat that, already that satisfaction comes with it. So you are now not necessarily wanting to go for, 5 more, because that was such a satisfying experience. So what is your action plan when you notice that you're in that moment when you come down into your kitchen at night and maybe everyone's asleep, but you're wanting to eat something and you recognize now you're in that emotional eating mode. And just before you reach for the ice cream or whatever it is, I want you to just check in with yourself, right? And just recognize, what is it that you're experiencing at that moment? What signs of distress? So we often don't acknowledge our own stress signals, right? And that could be emotional. It could be, I'm feeling a bit sad. It could be, I'm feeling just anxious because I'm having a lot of thoughts, like worrying thoughts about my future, or I'm thinking about my day, what happened today, and maybe just replaying a lot of things in your mind. But it also could be just tension, right? You're feeling that tension in your neck. Maybe you're feeling it in your lower back, so you're having tightness of your muscles, or your jaw. A lot of times we're grinding our teeth and we don't even realize we're doing these things because it's all subconscious, right? So maybe you're feeling the tension right here. So when you recognize that, all right, I'm actually not hungry, I'm probably like an 8 on the scale of the hunger scale, and we just had dinner not that long ago. So it's not hunger that's driving this. So then ask yourself, like, what in this moment do I need that's going to help me, right? Maybe there are people that you talk to that are your energy boosters. Maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's petting your dog, but maybe it's just calling a friend and talking about your day, right? And then think about 5 things that you do to relax. So there are other ways of relaxing other than eating chocolates or ice cream, right? So it could be taking a bath. I love the scent of lavender, and I find lavender really relaxing. So essential oils can be very relaxing. Going for a walk. I can't say enough about exercise, but going out for a walk and just appreciating nature and listening to the sounds in the environment and just breathing, and just the things that we take for granted, right? But listening to music, I think I said that. And then lastly, my favorite, of course, is watching comedy. So watching Golden Girls or Trevor Noah, but distracting yourself, right? And then, for some people, it's reading, but doing the crossword puzzle. So have your action plan. So again, this is something that can go on your refrigerator as well, of what you're going to do when you find yourself in that moment. Self-compassion, I have to say, we're so hard on ourselves, right? We're probably our worst critic. And self-compassion has been associated with well-being, feelings of happiness, and greater personal initiative to make any needed changes in your life. Christian Neff has written extensively about self-compassion, and I highly, highly recommend you go online and look up Kristen Neff's. There's books and YouTube videos. And research has also shown that self-compassion helps people overcome with their guilt and with their eating choices. So when we talk about self-compassion, yes, it's soothing to hug yourself, but also if you have, it's talking to yourself like the way you would talk to your best friend or your sibling, right? So if you had a friend or a loved one who was struggling with their eating and they called you and they said, I can't believe I just did this, right? I said I wasn't going to do this and I just ate all of this ice cream. Like, how would you respond to this person? You'd probably be really positive and supportive and say, you know what? It's okay. Tomorrow you'll have a better action plan and maybe go back to that mindful eating resource that you had learned about and just helping them in that moment. And that's how I want you to talk to yourself instead of doing that self-blame and the guilt. And then how might things change if you respond to yourself kindly? So you'll notice when you are having that conversation with yourself, immediately there is this release of that stress response, right? So when we're doing that self-blame and criticism, we feel that stress response, our stress signals, well, maybe our neck gets tight and things. But when you start having those soothing conversations with yourself, where you're nice to yourself, you'll also notice immediately that you start to relax more. So in summary, I want you to rethink emotional eating and getting in touch with your hunger, your fullness, and what's satisfying, right? And practice mindful eating, give yourself grace, and then practice sorting through any negative self-talk, which is so harmful for us. And with that, I want to thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk to you all. I'm so excited. This is a picture from one of my walks with my patients at the Arnold Arboretum. I have to say, nature is the most important thing that we can do for our stress physiology. Just being out in nature and taking a walk already helps to reduce our stress hormones. So definitely take advantage of this summer. So I'll take questions.
Okay, so I just want to come on and remind everybody that you can ask questions through the Q&A feature or by sending a chat to the host and panelists. And I'm actually, Dr. Ramchandani, maybe we go off of screen share so we can see
Sure, yeah.
see you for the responses. Perfect. Oh, and I've got one already here. So first question, I find that during the summer season, it can be harder to make mindful food choices with barbecues and other social events. Could you talk about how to navigate social meals?
Yes, that's a great question. And actually, it also comes up around the holidays, right? So one of the things that we tend to do when we have a party coming up is that we, quote, save our calories, right? We don't eat all day because we know there's all this food coming. So I would say that's absolutely not advisable, because clearly if we're doing that, by the time we get to the event, we're at a 1 or a 2, and now we're ravenous. And then the second thing is I always recommend waiting for all the spread to come out, because oftentimes when we start grabbing things as they come, we don't sometimes even realize there's more of a main meal that's coming. And then we fill out already on the apps. And of course, we have to try the main meal, right? And the desserts. So I would suggest trying to eat slowly, mindfully, but try to wait, if possible, for everything to be out. So then you can make those choices, because by the time the salads come out, you want to try to reach for things that are low caloric, right? So basically, low calorie density would be things that are like vegetables that will help to already take up a lot of space and fill you. So if you are starting with those choices, and then of course doing the protein as well, that already is going to be so satiating that you may not have too much room left. And then I think the other big thing in the summertime that people run into is drinking empty calories, right? So there's often beer and wine at barbecues. So you want to be mindful of that. I think having just your water glass with you, or your, sparkling water, whatever it is, around and available, is going to help you to reduce that unnecessary caloric intake that's kind of empty. So that's what, oh, and of course, try to eat before you go to the party, but not too much, right? Because you want to have a normal day, like your lunch or your breakfast, before you go to an evening barbecue, because you don't want to get there ravenous. But does that help?
Thank you so much. Next question. Do you have an eating plan that you like, something like Whole30 or other suggestions?
That's a great question. Yeah, I am not somebody who believes in any diets at all. And I know you called it an eating plan, which was exactly the words that I would have chosen, Katie, because we should not be on a diet, and people go on diet and they go off diets. And so in terms of eating pattern, I'm going to call it, I like to really stick with the Mediterranean eating pattern. And again, all that essentially really means is getting a lot of vegetables, non-starchy, lots of fruits, and then having your nuts and beans and healthy fats, and sources for, seafood, fish, if you like that, a couple of times a week. But generally, if you're eating in that sort of a pyramid, we know that that is a heart healthy diet. And then making that what we call low glycemic, which is really just a low refined carbohydrate, because you're focusing more on your whole grains.
Okay, next up, I notice with some foods, it is so easy to overeat, especially when I'm stressed or upset. Why is it so much harder to moderate my portions with food like chocolate or potato chips? I never overdo it when it comes to fruits and vegetables.
That's a great question, Katie. Yeah. And I think that goes back to my slide earlier, as I was talking about how there is that release, right, of the neurotransmitters, right? Immediately you have that serotonin release, the dopamine release. And certainly we're going to be very much more relaxed and have this pleasurable effect. So yes, it's a lot easier to eat that. But my advice again would be, of course, I would love a piece of chocolate over, having broccoli. But in that moment, just recognizing that you're trying to moderate what you're eating and how much of it is eating it mindfully. There's absolutely no such thing as a bad food. And you can absolutely eat that piece of chocolate. Just eat it slowly, enjoy it without any guilt, and be really mindful.
Next up, is snacking a healthy behavior? There are some claims that snacking increases hunger. What are your thoughts on that?
That's an excellent question. So I definitely think that you should snack if you are on that hunger scale where you're at a 3 or 4. So if people are not, if you're not hungry and you're snacking just because, right? Because it's there, that's not a good reason to snack, because we don't need certainly to snack in the middle of our day between meals. We're hoping that people are eating their balanced meals at their breakfast, lunch, dinner, and it's a structured eating plan. And in between those meals, if you are getting to be a little bit hungry because you're at a 3 or a 4, I would rather people have a healthy snack so they don't drop down to 1 or 2 by the time they get home.
I just want to mention in the chat right now, we have a lot of people resonating with craving certain foods when stress comes up. So I'm so glad we're covering this topic today. Okay, next question for you. Sometimes I use food for a quick fix during a busy, stressful day. What techniques could I use instead that are fast?
Okay, so I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Yeah, so I think what the question is getting at is when it's a busy, stressful moment, but we can't use the techniques like go for a walk or exercise.
Sure.
What are quick stress busting techniques that could be as quick as food?
Okay, that's a great question. So I will tell you what I have used. So we all have those moments, right, where we can't really get away, and you've got 8 hours of being at the office and doing whatever you need to do. Couple of things that immediately will help. One, I find that getting up from your chair and doing some jumping jacks is extremely helpful. I know it sounds crazy, but if, hey, no one's watching you, why not? Right? Because already you are the exercise already is making you more energized and you're in a better mood. So that is excellent. And then I find having tea available to me helpful in my day. So when I'm having a little bit of a lull in the middle of my day, I will grab either some chamomile tea, which I find very relaxing and soothing. But also, if you're not a tea fan, you don't have to do that. I find almonds to be super helpful. If you are a little bit just peckish and you want a little boost, a small pack of raw almonds does the trick with a big glass of water. I can't stress enough how much water is actually helpful for us. And I would encourage you when you're feeling that way to have a nice cold glass of water and just see how you feel.
Next question. One of the attendees was really interested in when you talked about blueberries being as effective as a medication like Prozac. Could you talk a little bit more about foods that have a similar effect for boosting mood?
Absolutely. Yeah, so a lot of the foods that I had mentioned earlier in my slide, things that are generally high fiber, right? Because so if you eat foods that are, say, probiotic rich, and you couple them with foods that are, quote, prebiotic rich, which the prebiotics are feeding the good, healthy bacteria in your gut, right? So foods that are rich in probiotics are things like your fermented foods, like your sauerkraut or your kimchi, and then or even kefir. I don't know if anyone's tried kefir, but yogurt or kefir. So if, for instance, you're using the prebiotic, your blueberries, say, are your source of the prebiotics. That's the fiber rich. And if you are putting a smoothie together, maybe you put in the yogurt or you have just the yogurt and the blueberries by itself, and you don't need to make a smoothie out of it. But then you are combining now the effect of the two, and now that's helping your good bacteria to thrive because they have something to feed on. So generally just really high fiber foods, but also fermented foods and cultured.
Okay, this is going to be our last question. So, we have someone that was interested in hearing a little bit more about self-compassion. They were explaining that it's a little counterintuitive to the way that they thought they needed to motivate themselves to eat in this way. Could you talk about sort of that irony of self-compassion that you brought up earlier?
Yeah, no, of course. Um, it definitely seems like it would be counterintuitive, right? The main thing about self-compassion really is that we are so quick to judge ourselves, right? We are our worst critics. And it's almost like you have this thing sitting on your shoulder, constantly in your head saying, I can't believe you just did that, right? I can't believe you just ate all of that. Like, what were you thinking? But if yet a loved one, a friend, maybe did the same act, you wouldn't necessarily be thinking that way of them. And if they came to you, you would try to make them feel better, right? I think what is really harmful about that self-blame or that little critic that's sitting on your shoulder is really that stress physiology. So we get stuck in this loop because now that blame that you're doing or getting mad at yourself makes your stress physiology more activated, right? And having that activated stress physiology is not going to be helpful for the cravings. So you're stuck in that loop, that habit loop that I was referring to earlier. And now you're in that, you're releasing more cortisol. So you're now craving again those comfort foods. So you basically are stuck in the cycle. But whereas if you come at it with a self-compassionate approach that, hey, that's okay, I gave in today and that's okay. It's not a big deal because it's 80% of the time I am really good. I'm not good. I shouldn't say the word good because I said you have to get away from good and bad. But if 80% of the week you had been following your healthy eating pattern, and if over the weekend you had a 20% where you said, you know what, I'm going to allow myself to have this little piece of dessert, then there should not be that guilt, that shame that comes with this, and then activates our stress physiology and doesn't make us feel so good. I hope that's clear.
Thank you so much. And actually, looking at the time, I'm going to squeeze one more in. We had just
Okay.
one come in. I am whole food plant-based, not eating any salt, sugar, or oil or processed foods. Why do I crave something sweet after dinner? If I don't have this late at night, I feel starving.
Okay, I would really wonder if you're starving because if you've had what sounds like an incredibly healthy meal, if you're whole food plant-based and you're doing all the right things, if there is enough protein sources on your plate and fiber, I imagine, you should not be starving after dinner. I would doubt that you are on the hunger scale at a 1 or a 2. You're probably at a 7 or a 6. So I don't think it's starvation that's driving that wanting to eat something sweet. So the question is, it's a craving for the sweet, which is different from the hunger, right? And if there is a craving, the question is, what else is driving that craving? And that's when I had said to sit with it. Because when you are sitting with and recognizing physically, emotionally, what is happening in your body, oftentimes you'll come up with that answer yourself. Like for some people, it's pain, like chronic pain, for instance. For some people, it's actually just sleep deprivation. And then for others, it might be that they had a really stressful day and now they have tense neck muscles. So oftentimes there's something else that's driving that craving, but not starvation. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much. And I just want to share that we have some appreciation in the comments for this topic. It was very timely, and we're so glad you were able to present today. I'm just going to close with a couple of announcements. So I'm going to share my screen here.
Okay.
So I have just in the chat added a link to our feedback survey. To access the chat, you can typically on a computer navigate down to the bottom bar in Zoom, pull up the chat, click on the chat feature, and there will be a link to our feedback survey. We would ask that you click on the link now and open the window. You don't need to complete the survey right away, but when the Zoom ends, that link will go away. So we're hoping people can access the chat, click the link, open the window, and then finish the survey at your convenience. And then also, I want to announce that we are going to be posting this webinar, and we have a number of other webinars onto our YouTube channel. So I'm also going to post in the chat the second link here, that just went in the chat, to our healthy lifestyle program YouTube channel. We did have a webinar in May on habit science that is posted up there. And we also had another webinar series previously with 3 other webinars on healthy lifestyle topics. We are recording today's webinar, so we will get that up in about a week. So if you save the link to our YouTube channel, we'll be continually updating our YouTube with this webinar and other content. And I want to just lastly thank Dr. Ramchandani for joining us today. We are looking forward to doing other webinars in the future, and in the feedback form, you can share with us if there are topics that would be interested in you. We definitely want to hear what is relevant to our audience. And with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending, and thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.